and welcome to Lee Earle's Center Tear Teach-In. The center tear is a mentalist's method for gaining information. It's been said with card magic, for example, if you know one location and several methods of revealing the selected card, you know several different card tricks. Well, this is analogous in mentalism. If you know one method of gaining the information and several methods of revealing it, then you know several different presentations. The center tear is probably the most versatile method that the mentalist has of gaining information. In this tape, I'm going to teach you several different ways of using center tear, including my own personal center tear technique, which can be done close-up, surrounded, with almost any piece of paper in dim light. All of the bases are covered. In other words, you will have the knowledge, once you finish learning what's on this tape, to accomplish miracles at a moment's notice. Let's begin. Many years ago, there was a rather interesting technique that was tried on television. It was one in which the manufacturers or advertisers of a product would flash the name of the product in big, bold print letters right on the television screen. It would only be for an instant. Supposedly, it would make an impression on your subconscious mind, but wouldn't be noticed consciously. It was called subliminal impressioning. Well, as an advertising technique, it left a great deal to be desired. But as a premise in psychology, it works quite well. As a matter of fact, this is what television sets used to look like back when I was a teenager, in that difficult period between infancy and adultery. Now, Barbara, what I really need for you to do is to form a good, clear image, but let's restrict it as long as the subject is television. Please think of the name of someone associated with television. Game show, comedy show, talk show, it doesn't matter, but a name I'll recognize, not the second assistant key grip on Bonanza, for example. Do you have that image in mind? Now, you'll see why it's important in a moment, but I want you, please, to print that person's name in block letters right there on the television screen, exactly as those advertisers did. If you would. And it's important, of course, that you don't show it to me at this time, otherwise that would spoil the denouement. It's a long name.
I may not be able to spell, but I think you'll recognize it.
Spelling doesn't count. Now please hold it up where I can't see it. Good. Now, I'll cover it like this, and just for a moment, get a quick flash of it. Now again. And again. That was the subliminal impressioning technique. Would you do this, please? Would you refold the paper? Good. And would you hold it up to the light, please? Later, when we're successful with this, that will be the first thing that comes to your mind. And as you can see, it's impossible to see anything through the paper. Maybe a couple of marks, but nothing else. Now, I want you to place that person's image right in your mind. Hold this up right here. No, not there. Just concentrate. And I want you to think of this person. Look at me. Good. You see this person, and I get a very definite masculine impression. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, it is. I also get the impression of little smile lines at the corners of the eyes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And I'm also getting the impression of a little graying at the temples. No?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Let me show you an old gypsy trick. I learned this from an old gypsy. I was the trick. What I want you to do, Barbara, first of all, we don't need this anymore, but just in case, I want you to take all of these pieces and I want you to hold them cupped in your hands. Cup your hands, like this. Just like that. Good. Cup them in your hands. And I want you to concentrate on that person. See him in your mind's eye. For some reason, and I don't know why, this little ditty, this little music keeps coming into my mind. It's da 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 da. Oh, Rob. Were you indeed thinking of the name Dick Van Dyke?
Yes.
Isn't thought transfer wonderful? Thank you very much for helping, Barbara.
Thank you.
But first, let me talk about the center tear and explain the basic concept before we get into the good handling. Someone once discovered that if you take a piece of paper and fold it in fourths, in one direction, then another, tear it in half, thus and so, instead of having a bunch of little pieces of paper, which you do, you also have one section of paper which is approximately 1/3 the size of the original, which is or was the center. Let me show you what I mean. If I write a word, W-O-R-D, sounds like a radio station east of the Mississippi. If you fold that paper in half and in half again, and then tear it, I'll not tear it all the way, just as if I had torn it straight down through this way, and then straight down through this way. But you'll see that the center of the paper is now missing. It and all of its information is right here. That's the essence of the center tear. Now, there are a number of things that are important in developing the center tear, and a lot of psychological concepts. For example, the most important thing, in my view, is the justification for writing something down to begin with. Now, obviously, our justification is they have to write it so we can read it. But in actuality, there has to be a better justification than that for the participant. Notice, by the way, I use the word participant, not spectator. They're not just watching, they're participating. One excuse could be, you could say to someone, remember when you were in the first grade and your teacher told you if you wrote something down 5 times, you'd remember it forever. Well, let's try just writing it down once. I want you to visualize that word letter by letter. That would be one good excuse for writing it down. Another reason for writing it down might be, I want you to have a record of this so that we'll remember later. Well, of course, that doesn't really fly well because you're going to end up tearing it up. There are ways to cover that. For example, you could ask someone, will you please write down the word you're thinking of? Fold it again, and they folded it twice. And you say, by the way, did you write or did you print? Well, I wrote like you had. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant for you to print. Try it again. And of course, you've got your center. You could ask someone, for example, for a sample of his or her handwriting or something of that sort. But the thing that I use is this subliminal impressioning technique. The nice thing about it is it ties into something everybody already knows or think they know. It's more of an urban legend than anything else. But everyone knows they used to flash words on television and in the movies to get you to buy products. And they knew it was flashed for an instant, and just like in my patter story. That gives the justification for writing it down. Now, as far as stealing and reading the center, there is an excellent technique described in Corinda's 13 Steps to Mentalism, in which after the information is written, and it must be positioned obviously in the center of the paper. And I'll talk about that in a second. There are ways to get it. For example, one way you might do it is simply to draw a circle. Imagine this is a crystal ball. And right there in the crystal ball, I want you to write your information. Well, that's okay. I like the television, again, for the patter story possibilities and for other reasons. Nonetheless, if they write their word right in the center of the paper, and you ask the person to fold it and fold it again, then it must be obvious that you never look at the paper. Oh, there are some wonderful center tear techniques out there. Richard Osterland's close-up surrounded center tear technique, for example. Beautifully thought out. Bruce Bernstein's center tear technique is another one. Ray Hyman has yet another one. Richard Stride has one, scatter thought. They're all excellent techniques. In my view, they have one weakness. And that is, you must look at the paper while you're tearing. Now, if there's a single weak spot, that's it. Because if you have a skeptical audience, one who feels that you somehow looked at what was written on the paper, your only opportunity to do it was when you were tearing. There may be more than one person who remembers that your eyes dropped to the paper, even though they couldn't see the paper when it was being torn. They're certainly aware that you could have. My center tear eliminates that because, as you'll see, rewind the video, take a look. You don't see me looking at the paper once while I'm tearing, and yet apparently the effect is over at that time. I digress. The information is in the center. Let's assume you've asked someone to write their thought, fold it. Be sure to ask them to hold it up to the light, because people will think later, well, you held it up to the light, you looked through it. So ask the people in a good-natured way, listen, this thought transfer is going to be so amazing. You're going to think that somehow, no, it's not the case. So, after it's sealed in the center, Oh, and by the way, please resist the temptation to get those cutesy little post-it notes with the stick 'em on one side, and then someone suggested writing the information on the back side of the note. Now fold the note, sealing it inside. Well, what that's subtly doing is telling people that other people may be so unscrupulous as to peek. So therefore, to prevent me from peeking, seal it inside by sticking it down. Well, that's nonsense. You're once again planting ideas in people's minds that shouldn't be there. Back to the tear. Corinda says, after you do the tear once this way, now notice this is the corner which has the center information, and it goes behind the other pieces, and then you tear again. Now the corner which has the important information is here. Well, it's a simple thing just to pull it back and push the others up. Thusly, you've stolen the piece. It's not really a move, it's just kind of keeping it in your hand. Forget about it while it's there, by the way. Corinda suggests asking someone to burn these pieces of paper, totally eliminating a symbolic destruction of the thought. And just in case, as the pieces burn in this ashtray, they may unfold and reveal what's written, I'll turn aside. At which point you take the piece of paper and stick it into your pocket, and surreptitiously inside your pocket, open it up. I'll do it with two hands because it's quicker. And then once your back is turned, as the pieces are burning, you want to get a piece of the paper, look at the piece of paper, so you cough. Whoops, it's sideways. Wait a minute. Put it back in, turn it around, bring it back up again. Cough again. Then return it to your pocket, come back and reveal the word in your best mentalist manner. I think you can see a couple of weaknesses in that method. First of all, there is a little bit of fiddling and fumbling in your pocket as you're opening up the piece of paper that has the center information on it. Also, if the word happens to come out upside down after you've torn it and you cough and you can't read it right away, either you have to take it back to your pocket to turn it over to bring it back right side up, or you can try to read it upside down and have a coughing fit. Well, it's just, it's craziness. Yes, you can do it, you can get away with it. If you're doing it pre-show, for example, that is, doing a setup before the show with one single participant from the audience who later is brought on stage and simply I ask you to think of a word before the show. I ask you to concentrate on it in a specific way. Is that correct? Yes. Does that word exist now in any form, written or otherwise? Well, no, it doesn't. Well, that's because, of course, you burned or tore the pieces. You don't say, did you ever write it down? Don't ask questions you don't like the answer to. Well, in any event, if you're doing it pre-show and you tear up the pieces and you pocket the one piece, obviously you can open it and read it at your leisure. But we're talking about a technique now where you may be not able to get away from everyone. And the idea of having to conceal this as you... Oh, there's a wonderful technique that some people teach that involves taking this little torn center, dropping it to your lap and opening it there very quietly, very surreptitiously, and then as you concentrate, shielding your eyes, looking down into your lap. Once again, you don't always have the benefit of a table. You don't always have the benefit of having everyone to the front. Quite often when you work, and you'll find this more as a mentalist than in many other cases you may be that may be in your experience, that people really gather around. They're curious. This is very compelling stuff. Stepping into someone's mind to perceive a thought, that's very private territory. That's just about as involved as it gets. So people tend to cluster around, and you don't have a lot of cover to be opening things in your lap. That's why I developed my particular technique. It also guarantees when you open the paper, when you get a look at that torn center, the word will be right side up. It will be easily legible because, you see, I have supplied a felt tip pen, a broad tip felt tip pen. I've supplied a justification for printing the word in block letters. So you're not going to get some doctor's prescription of a scrawl, which you couldn't possibly read given 20 coughs and an attack of emphysema. Instead, with this technique, it's printed right side up, big block letters. You get it first time, every time. So get ready, get set, because we're going to go in just a second. Now, my center tear technique will work with all types of paper. Some are easier than others. Obviously, something as flimsy as newsprint could be used, but I'd advise against it, especially in your early learning stages. The paper I've chosen is from one of those cubes of colored paper where you get all the different stacks of colors, but it's a good quality stuff. It's at least a 20-pound bond. It's also a paper that doesn't have a whole lot of crinkle when you fold it. I really recommend, if you're going to be doing center tear a lot, have some custom pads padded for you, about 3 inches by 4 inches instead of 3 inches square, and have a good, at least a 25% rag, they call it, a cotton content paper, with a little bit of a tone or a color to it, a tan, a blue, a buff, a beige, something like that. The most overlooked thing, I think, is the psychology of a center tear. Now, I talked about the pre-justifying the reason for writing something down to begin with. Obviously, also, we want it written in the center of the paper. One of the best ways to do it, the early center tear advocates just drew a line and asked the person to write something right on that line. That's easy enough. But I like to give the person a little bit more room. Sometimes they need to take 2 lines in writing down a name: Johnny Carson, Alan Alda, Phil Donahue. Very seldom do you get Cher. So the best thing to do is to occupy all of the paper with something else. There's no place left for them to write. So what I do is I do it with my little television set. And in doing that, I draw the screen first. That enables me to find the center of the paper. Then I fill it in with the rest of the television around it, putting the old-fashioned rabbit ears up on top and a little bit of a speaker down at the bottom with some knobs. That, in effect, guarantees a couple of things. First, that the screen area of the television is the only place they have to write. It also guarantees that they're going to write right side up in alignment with the paper as it sits. Nobody ever turns it sideways to write something on the television set. We're kind of preconditioned that way. That's really, really important, because in my center tear technique, all of the handling is done without looking. You don't have the luxury, or perhaps you do have the luxury, of not having to look. That means then that when the center is eventually opened, it's going to be right side up in your hand, ready to read, block print, dark felt pen, light paper, if you follow these very important instructions. First, it may not have been apparent to you, but when I handed the paper to Barbara for her to write or to place her subliminal impression, it was already folded. It had been pre-creased, pre-folded. I did not give her a pristine piece of paper with the television set drawn on it and then ask her to fold the paper. Once again, if you'll listen to the presentation one more time, you'll hear I said, please refold the paper, with just the slightest bit of emphasis on re. Please refold the paper. And that's really important. It's the fold, or the pre-fold, that does all